It all started with a lock. Not just any lock. This wasn't your average padlock or rusty deadbolt. It was a high-end smart lock installed on the back door of my lake cabin, a place I had owned free and clear for nearly 15 years. A simple convenience to keep my gear safe and my weekends peaceful. But in neighborhoods ruled by small-minded tyrants with HOA authority, even something as harmless as a lock could turn into a full-blown neighborhood scandal. My lake property wasn't some humble shack either. It sat about 20 minutes outside the nearest suburban sprawl. Far enough for me to feel off-grid when I wanted, but close enough that nosy neighbors could still justify getting involved if they thought something wasn't to code. The HOA wasn't even supposed to apply to my cabin. My land sat technically outside their jurisdiction, a historical technicality the HOA didn't like to acknowledge. Years back, the board tried to include my lot in a vote about new dock construction, and I sent a legal notice reminding them I wasn't part of their governance. The matter had been quiet ever since. Or so I thought. That changed the summer Rick, the HOA vice president and self-proclaimed property standards enforcer, decided to start making his rounds by the lake. Rick was in his late 50s comb-over, wore polos tucked aggressively into his cargo shorts. He liked clipboards, barking at teenagers, and boasting about how he kept this community from turning into chaos. Rick had one fatal flaw. He hated not being in control. I wasn't even at the cabin when this mess began. It started with my neighbor Doug calling me, half amused and half concerned. "Hey, man, you planning to be up here this weekend? HOA's been sniffing around your dock again." Doug owned the property across the inlet. He didn't care about HOAs. He had a no trespassing sign the size of a billboard and a pit bull named Daisy who backed it up. But he liked to keep me in the loop when something smelled fishy. Apparently, Rick had been spotted walking the perimeter of my fence, jotting things down. Doug said he even poked at my gate, likely testing to see if it was locked. That was new. Normally, the HOA only whined through passive-aggressive letters, not personal visits. Still, I wasn't alarmed. I'd updated the cabin security over the winter. New cameras, reinforced locks, motion sensors linked to my phone. The smart lock was my latest addition. Doug told me Rick seemed especially annoyed by that, stood there frowning at it like it had insulted his authority. A few days later, I received a certified letter, HOA letterhead, bold, angry font. The accusation? Unauthorized security installations in violation of community aesthetic guidelines. Community guidelines? I wasn't part of their community. My property deed said so. My lawyer had confirmed it twice over the years. I drafted a polite but firm response, including scanned copies of my original deed, boundary survey, and a 2014 legal letter that clarified my exemption from their nonsense. Sent it via email, certified post, and dropped a hard copy off at their office for good measure. I thought that would be the end of it. Instead, it got worse. 3 days later, while I was sitting in a meeting at my job, miles away in the city, my phone buzzed. Security alert. Backdoor, unauthorized access attempt. Backdoor, tampering detected. I checked the footage. There he was, Rick, standing on my deck, tugging on a smart lock like a raccoon trying to break into a cooler, clipboard under one arm, phone in hand, looking around like he thought he was on official business. The cameras captured everything. His face, his attempt to open my door, his brief, suspicious glance directly into the lens before he scurried off like a teenager caught shoplifting. Within minutes, I called Doug. "Hey, is someone at my cabin right now?" Doug, always the watchdog, confirmed it. "Yeah, Rick. Left about 10 minutes ago looking pissed." I wasn't furious yet. More bewildered. Who tries to break into someone's property because they don't like their lock? That bewilderment turned to disbelief later that afternoon when I received another notification. 911 call placed. Reported trespassing at my address. Guess who made the call? Rick, according to the report. Public information. Thanks to Doug's connections, the HOA claimed they'd witnessed suspicious technology installed without permission and feared potential violations of state security codes. That was his excuse. My lock was suspicious enough to warrant calling the police on my property. Except Rick hadn't told the cops the whole truth. He hadn't told them he'd already been on my land, or that he had no legal authority to enforce anything there. That weekend, I arrived at the cabin in person. I pulled into my driveway behind a sheriff's cruiser already waiting for me. 2 deputies greeted me politely enough, but had questions. "Sir, we got a call about some kind of illegal surveillance equipment on the property." I almost laughed. Instead, I unlocked my phone, pulled up my deed, and showed them. This is an HOA land. I own it. This lock, installed legally by me, monitored legally by me. HOA's got no jurisdiction here. They nodded, professional but slightly amused. "Mind if we take a look? Just so we can close out the complaint. Be my guest." We walked the perimeter together. I showed them the cameras, the locks, even the power source tied neatly into the cabin's updated grid. Nothing illegal, nothing shady. You'd be surprised how often these HOA folks think their rules are state law. One deputy said, "We'll mark this cleared. No violations." But Rick didn't like that answer. Oh no, he doubled down, filed another formal HOA complaint, sent another certified letter, this time escalating the threats about community lawsuits and public safety concerns. Doug told me Rick was telling neighbors I had unauthorized surveillance technology aimed at their homes, which was ridiculous given my cameras pointed solely at my own property. At this point, it wasn't about the lock, or the cameras, or even the HOA. It was about control. Rick couldn't stand the idea of someone nearby who answered to no one but himself. What Rick didn't know yet was that by stepping onto my land, pulling at my lock, and making those 911 calls under false pretenses, he wasn't enforcing anything. He was trespassing. And I was about to make that very, very clear with evidence, witnesses, and a little help from the county courthouse. If Rick had just accepted the sheriff's report and gone back to policing mailbox paint colors, this would have ended right there. But no, guys like Rick don't back down because of facts or legal documents. They double down, convinced they're the law even when the law disagrees. That's what makes people like him dangerous, and why this story didn't end with a cleared report. It escalated. Within days of my conversation with the deputies, Doug called me again. This time, he sounded ticked. "You're not going to believe this. HOA is holding some special emergency meeting about your place." "About my cabin?" I said, "I'm not even in their HOA." That's what makes it funnier. They're circulating this fake narrative that you've got some illegal surveillance compound set up, something about privacy threats to neighbors, even though none of your cameras point anywhere near them. Rick had started campaigning against me. He'd been going door to door spinning stories to anyone who'd listen. According to Doug's wife, who had heard all at her book club, Rick was painting me as some paranoid survivalist who was building a data center by the waterline. "He's saying you've got military-grade surveillance tech installed," Doug said, practically laughing. "You know, because your smart lock and a couple Ring cameras clearly qualify as top-secret government equipment." At this point, it wasn't even about HOA rules anymore. It was about Rick's pride. He couldn't handle losing. Couldn't handle the fact I wasn't scared of his letters or his petty threats. So he did what small men with too much time and imagined authority always do. He turned up the heat. The HOA's next move was bold. Stupid, but bold. They issued a formal notice claiming my property was in violation of their extended security guidelines and gave me 14 days to remove unauthorized electronic monitoring devices. Attached was a $1,000 fine. Not a suggested fine. An invoice. I laughed out loud when I opened it. They had zero legal right to fine me, let alone enforce their nonsense over property that didn't belong to their association. But Rick didn't care. He figured the threat of escalating paperwork would pressure me into compliance. I sent a certified letter in return, CC'd to my lawyer, stating, again, that my property was not and had never been under HOA jurisdiction. I included legal documentation. I included the sheriff's cleared report. I even sent a printed, highlighted map from the county's own website, confirming my parcel sat outside HOA boundaries. Rick ignored it all. He posted notices on my gate, left passive-aggressive flyers under my windshield wipers when I came out to fish on the weekends. The tone escalated from remove your equipment to cease all unauthorized activity immediately. Meanwhile, I quietly collected everything. Security footage of Rick on my property. Copies of every HOA letter and threat. Audio from neighbors confirming Rick was lying to them. Screenshots of the fabricated fines and fake notices. Doug even snapped a few photos of Rick standing at the edge of my dock again, clipboard in hand like some absurd HOA pirate claiming land that wasn't his. Then came the kicker. Rick tried to involve the county zoning board. I'd got a letter, not from the HOA this time, but from the county, requesting clarification about new construction on my land. Turns out, Rick had filed a formal complaint alleging I was building unauthorized structures that violated shoreline management regulations. My unauthorized structures, the security cameras, a lock gate, a new kayak rack. I met with the county inspector in person. I showed them everything, my permits, my plans, my deed, the clear report from the sheriff. The inspector wasn't just apologetic, he was annoyed. We had 3 of these complaints from the same HOA this year, he told me. None of them hold water, but it's our job to investigate. He closed the case on the spot. No violations found. No fines issued. But the real gift wasn't the inspector's apology. It was the paper trail. Now I had government records backing my claims. Rick had weaponized county resources under false pretenses. That's harassment. Possibly fraud. Definitely stupid. Still, Rick wasn't done. He wanted to win so badly, he was willing to cross legal lines to get it. That's when he made his biggest mistake yet. He trespassed again, but this time he brought backup one weekend. Doug called me sounding more serious than usual. You might want to head up here, man. Rick's on your property again. This time a guy in a polo shirt with a private security badge. I checked my cameras. Sure enough, there they were, Rick and some rent-a-cop-looking guy pacing around my dock, pointing at my cameras, talking into walkie-talkies like they were running an op. The so-called security officer had no authority on my land. They weren't even licensed county security. Doug, bless him, walked right over and asked them who they thought they were. The exchange was glorious. Doug, you know this is an HOA land, right? Rick, we're conducting an inspection. Doug, a property you don't own. For an HOA you don't represent here. On land you're trespassing on. Rick, sir, this doesn't concern you. Doug, it will when my buddy files charges. They left fast. Cameras caught everything. Faces, voices, actions. I compiled the footage, the incident reports, the county's documentation, and my lawyer's letters. My file was now a fortress. That night, I made a call to my lawyer, yes, but also to the sheriff. Not just about trespassing, about harassment, about fraudulent claims, about misuse of county resources. Rick wanted to fight? Fine. I was done playing defense. The next move wouldn't come from me. It would come from the law. And Rick? He wasn't ready for what happened next. By this point, I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't confused. I wasn't even annoyed. I was focused. Rick thought he'd been playing chess with me, that every escalation forced me to defend my position while he moved closer to winning. What he didn't realize was that I'd been letting him walk right into a legal trap the entire time. The thing about HOA bullies like Rick is they don't think anyone's watching them carefully enough to hold them accountable. They assume that if they make enough noise, people will back down. They think fear of fines, letters, or police calls is enough to make most homeowners crumble. But I wasn't most homeowners. And Rick was about to learn that in the most public, humiliating way possible. The first thing I did was formalize everything I had gathered so far. My lawyer and I prepared a detailed file with dates, times, photos, security footage, copies of every HOA letter, county documents, and my clean inspection reports. We included Rick's false complaints to the sheriff's office in the county, his unauthorized entry onto my property, and his ridiculous attempts at intimidation with a so-called private security officer. The file was thick enough to crush a small animal, and it was irrefutable. Then we took the next step. We filed an official harassment and trespassing complaint against Rick personally, not against the HOA. Against him. The sheriff's office didn't laugh this time. They'd already seen him on my property on camera. They responded to his frivolous calls. Now they had a legal record connecting all the dots. I wasn't done. My lawyer recommended a cease and desist letter. Not just a usual warning, but one backed by the threat of civil litigation for harassment, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Rick wasn't just making my life difficult. He was spreading lies to my neighbors, falsely accusing me of crimes, and wasting public resources. That's actionable. That's punishable. That's expensive. We sent the letter via certified mail and made sure a process server hand-delivered a copy to Rick's front door. According to Doug, who had the world's worst luck living 2 houses down from him, Rick turned bright red and immediately called an emergency HOA board meeting. Here's where things got delicious. My lawyer, and I anticipated Rick, would try to shield himself behind the HOA. So we prepared documents to send directly to the HOA's liability insurer. After all, if the board knew about Rick's behavior and allowed it, they could share liability. Suddenly, it wasn't just Rick's pride at risk. It was the association's money. The HOA president, a woman named Marcia, who up until now had seemed like a background character in this farce, called me personally. "Is there really a lawsuit pending?" she asked, trying to sound calm but audibly stressed. "There will be if Rick steps on my property one more time, yes. And if he doesn't, then you might just avoid a very expensive problem." Marcia promised she would look into it. A week later, the HOA issued a formal memo distancing themselves from Rick's actions, clarifying they'd been acting independently and without board approval. They stripped him of his enforcement role and revoked any authority he claimed to have. But Rick wasn't ready to quit. Instead, he filed a civil complaint against me through small claims court. His claim? That my security system was violating his privacy and the HOA's standards of appearance, and that my refusal to comply was costing the neighborhood property value. He demanded removal of my cameras, my lock, and compensation for his emotional distress. When my lawyer received the notice, he laughed for 5 full minutes. "I hope this gets to court," he said. "This is the dumbest complaint I've seen this year." He's walking into a buzzsaw. We didn't try to settle. We didn't back down. We prepared for court. And in preparation, I went the extra mile. I contacted the local news. Not the big networks. Just a small suburban outlet that loved nothing more than stories about petty neighborhood drama and overreaching HOA nonsense. I gave them the full breakdown. The false complaints. The trespassing. The police reports. The fabricated fines. The footage of Rick pulling on my lock like a burglar caught in daylight. They loved it. They ran a segment titled, "When HOA Power Trips Go Too Far." They blurred faces and kept names vague for legal reasons. But anyone in our neighborhood could figure out who was who. Doug said it played twice over the weekend. By Monday, the entire HOA board had convened again, not to strategize with Rick, but to figure out how to distance themselves even further. They issued another memo, this time barring Rick from holding any future position within the HOA. They cited behavior inconsistent with the standards and values of our community. Translation: Rick was now officially toxic. The best part? The county sent me a letter of apology for the inconvenience of the inspections. They confirmed in writing that my property was fully compliant, not under HOA jurisdiction, and no further action would be taken on any future complaints unless they involved actual crimes or violations. Rick's lawsuit day arrived. Small claims court is rarely dramatic. Except this time, it absolutely was. Rick showed up with his clipboard, his papers, and what I can only assume was the worst PowerPoint presentation ever created. He started strong, spewing nonsense about community standards, privacy concerns, and the suspicious nature of high-tech devices. Then my lawyer stood up and calmly, methodically, dismantled him. Exhibit A, my deed and boundary survey. Exhibit B, the county's inspection report. Exhibit C, the sheriff's clear reports. Exhibit D, security footage of Rick trespassing twice. Exhibit E, the HOA's own memo disowning him. Exhibit F, news coverage of the incident, highlighting Rick's behavior as extreme. The judge didn't even need time to deliberate. He ruled in my favor on every count. Rick's claim? dismissed with prejudice. My legal costs? To be paid by Rick. A formal injunction? Granted. Rick was now legally barred from stepping foot on my property. As we packed up to leave, Rick tried one last petty move. "This isn't over," he hissed at me outside the courtroom. My lawyer just smiled. "Oh, I think it is. For you." What Rick didn't know, yet, was that we'd already filed a separate civil claim for damages. Harassment, defamation, legal fees, emotional distress. The lawsuit was incoming, and this time, he wouldn't just lose. He'd lose in front of his neighbors, his HOA, and probably his wife. By the time our civil lawsuit was filed, Rick wasn't just fighting me anymore. He was fighting reality itself. His own HOA had turned against him. The county had shut down his complaints. The sheriff had warned him to stay away from my property. And the court had publicly humiliated him by dismissing his ridiculous privacy claims. But people like Rick, they don't know how to quit. They don't reflect. They don't apologize. And they certainly don't accept blame. Instead, they retreat to their last line of defense, denial. What Rick hadn't realized was how thoroughly I'd planned this final act. Every step he took in retaliation had been bait, and he'd swallowed it whole. While he thought he was wearing me down with fines, trespassing, and fake lawsuits, I'd been carefully laying out a legal and financial minefield he couldn't escape. Here's where the revenge really began to shine. Our civil suit wasn't just some vague harassment claim. It was specific, aggressive, and backed by evidence. Defamation, documented lies told to neighbors, the HOA board, and county officials about my alleged illegal surveillance operation. Harassment, multiple unwanted contacts, false claims to the police and county, trespassing incidents captured on video, intentional infliction of emotional distress, false police reports designed to cause disruption, public humiliation through fabricated accusations, legal fees, all costs from the small claims defense, preparation of the lawsuit, and related filings. Rick's attorney, because yes, he finally had to hire a real one, immediately tried to settle. They offered to walk away, with each side covering their own costs if I dropped the suit. My lawyer laughed. "We're not here to walk away. We're here to win." And we were going to win, not just for me, but to set a loud, public example that these HOA bullies couldn't ignore. In the weeks leading up to the court date, Rick became a ghost in the neighborhood. Gone were the days of him strutting around with clipboards and HOA decals. Now, he barely left his house except to collect mail or scurry to his SUV. Rumor had it his wife had stopped attending the HOA functions entirely. Some neighbors who'd once whispered about my cameras now waved when they saw me. A few even apologized. Doug, ever the loyal friend, kept me updated. "Rick's losing his grip," he said. "Half the board's talking about having him banned from future meetings permanently." At our next court date, Rick showed up looking smaller, paler, older. His lawyer tried to argue this was a misunderstanding blown out of proportion, but our evidence painted a very different picture. Dates, times, photos, videos, copies of all correspondence. The HOA's own memos confirming Rick had no authority. The sheriff's written warnings. The county's statements. The judge didn't take long. Verdict in my favor. Damages awarded. Enough to cover my legal fees, and then some. An official injunction. Rick could not contact me, step on my property, or make any further reports about me to any authority without legitimate, documented cause. But I didn't stop there. With that verdict in hand, I approached the HOA board one last time, this time with leverage. I presented them with a simple choice. Publicly distance the HOA from Rick's actions, revoke any association with his behavior, and issue a written apology for their failure to act sooner. Become a co-defendant in a larger suit for enabling his harassment and failing to protect non-member residents from rogue board members. The board caved immediately. They issued a formal letter, one that I happily shared with the local news outlet again, stating that Rick had acted alone. The HOA bore no responsibility for his personal vendettas, and they regretted any confusion or distress caused. They posted it on the community bulletin board. They emailed it to every homeowner. They even offered to cover part of my legal fees to move forward amicably. It was beautiful, public, permanent, but there was still one final flourish. I knew Rick's obsession with control wasn't limited to me. He'd been harassing neighbors for years. Petty fines, threats, gossip. He left a trail of bitterness wherever he went. So I did what any good neighbor would do. I hosted a neighborhood rights workshop. I invited an actual property rights attorney to speak about HOA limitations, homeowner protections, and legal recourse for overreach. Free coffee, free pastries, free enlightenment. The turnout? Huge. Not just from my neighborhood. Word spread to nearby communities, too. People brought their own horror stories. They took notes. They exchanged contact info. They realized, some for the first time, that they didn't have to live under the tyranny of clipboard bullies anymore. Rick wasn't invited. He sat in his house watching cars fill the cul-de-sac. Knowing every vehicle parked, there was another nail in the coffin of his imagined authority. After the workshop, the HOA board took a final vote. Rick was permanently banned from all future board positions, committees, and neighborhood oversight roles. A notice went out. Effective immediately, Richard, last name, is no longer affiliated with or authorized to represent this HOA in any capacity. Neighbors who've been silent for years started speaking openly. Stories came out. Apologies were made. Bridges were rebuilt. The man who tried to paint me as an enemy became a pariah in his own community. And me? I installed a new security system, just because, not because I needed it, but because it made Rick crazy to know it was there. It's funny how neighborhoods change. Not overnight, not in a dramatic fireworks kind of way, but slowly, subtly, like the tide creeping higher up the sand, washing away the footprints of the loudest, most obnoxious people. That's what happened after Rick's downfall. The man who once strutted to the neighborhood like he owned every square inch of it became nothing more than a cautionary tale told in hushed voices over backyard fences. His SUV, once adorned with those ridiculous HOA decals, sat untouched in his driveway for weeks, the stickers peeled off in shame. His house, once the epicenter of self-appointed authority, became just another bland suburban box with faded shutters and a dying lawn. Even his mailbox looked tired, leaning slightly to one side, as if giving up on standing tall. Rick's wife, who had spent years smugly supporting his crusades, seemed to vanish altogether. No more HOA meetings, no more gossip circles at the community center. Rumor had it she'd moved back in with family several towns over until things cooled off, though everyone knew she wasn't coming back. Not after the embarrassment, not after the headlines. Not after the neighbors she'd once lorded over now crossed the street to avoid even looking at her front porch. But here's where the irony settled in slowly, deliciously. With Rick out of power and the HOA licking its wounds from the legal battle they'd barely escaped, the neighborhood changed for the better. The ridiculous citations stopped. People parked where they wanted, within reason. Porch lights stayed on past 10. Trash cans lingered a little longer on the curb, without sparking letters of outrage. The neighborhood, freed from the iron grip of petty tyranny, began to feel like a community again. Doug, my neighbor and unofficial neighborhood historian, put it best one evening as we shared beers by the lake. You know what it is? Peace. Actual peace. Not the fake. Rules our order. Peace Rick always preached. Real peace. The kind where nobody's looking over your fence anymore. And me? I finally got to enjoy my lake cabin the way I'd intended from the start. Quietly, privately, and without some clipboard tyrant lurking around corners. But there was one last piece of irony Rick never saw coming. About 2 months after the lawsuit dust settled, I received a very official-looking letter in the mail. Not from the HOA, not from Rick, from a developer. Turns out, the HOA had been sitting on a quiet offer for years, one that Rick had been blocking personally because it didn't fit his vision for community. The offer? To buy a strip of land bordering my property for use as part of a nature trail and recreational park expansion. Without Rick standing in the way, the board unanimously approved the sale. The developer? Very eager to play nice, especially after hearing how things had gone down with Rick. Part of the deal included formal easements to ensure that no future HOA could ever claim rights over my property or anyone else's near the lake. Ever again. It was written into the county records. Permanent. Irrevocable. I bought the land. not for the trail. I had no interest in paving nature. I bought it for the irony. You see, the land Rick used to trespass on, the tiny strip he claimed gave him HOA authority over my cabin, it was included in that sale. It now belonged, officially and forever, to me. I put up a sign, not big, not obnoxious, just clear and satisfying. Private property. Trespassers will be prosecuted. Underneath, in smaller print, smile for the cameras. I didn't need to add Rick's name. Everyone knew. Neighbors started walking their dogs a little slower past my place. Some waved. Some nodded with a kind of quiet respect. A few even chuckled at the sign. Doug brought over a bottle of bourbon one evening and toasted me on the porch. To small victories that feel enormous, he said. To HOA-free living, I replied. And so life moved on. The HOA, stripped of its loudest enforcer, became something closer to what was supposed to be in the first place. Boring. They focus on community potlucks and lawn contests again, not surveillance and citations. Marcia, the president who had once tried to stay neutral, sent me a Christmas card that year. Inside was a simple handwritten note. Thanks for reminding us what community actually means. And Rick? Well, he was seen less and less. Eventually, a for sale sign popped up in front of his house. No big announcement, no grand farewell. Just a quiet exit, the way bullies tend to leave when they realize no one's listening anymore. Word was, he took a loss on the sale. Bad market timing, poor reputation, a neighborhood eager to see him gone. All factors that chipped away at his asking price. When the moving truck pulled away, Doug and I shared one last beer by the lake. Think he's learned anything? Doug asked. I shrugged. Doesn't matter. Everyone else did. That's the thing about people like Rick. They move on, find a new neighborhood, a new HOA to infest. But the people they leave behind, they remember. They tell the story. They warn the next generation of homeowners not to mistake petty power for real authority. As for me, I finally finished installing that smart lock system Rick had been so obsessed with. I upgraded it too. Now it works seamlessly with my security network, links straight to my phone, my computer, and even a backup server just in case someone ever gets ideas again. Sometimes I wonder if Rick drives past late at night, staring bitterly at the cabin he once thought he could control. I hope he does. I hope he sees the porch light still burning, the lawn still healthy, the neighbors still friendly, and realizes none of it ever had anything to do with him. Control is an illusion. Respect is earned. Peace is chosen. And this little corner of the lake? It's mine, now and forever.